Hello everyone, welcome to Resonant News. Agnipath scheme is being discussed everywhere, and in this noise, there are still some unanswered questions. Today, we have with us Col Subin Balakrishnan, a former Special Forces officer of the Indian Army, a very knowledgeable and well-decorated officer who has very comfortably bridged the gap between Indian Army and the corporate world, and ergo the right person to be speaking on this topic. Watch till the end.
Always a pleasure, Levina. Always a pleasure speaking with you. And there's a lot of noise in the environment in terms of the number of people who have got an opinion and a view on this. And I very deliberately chose not to speak on it or write on it because there's just so much of clutter that it just gets lost in the clutter. But I thought it is important. There were a couple of thoughts, and it is great that we are touching base. And maybe it's a good idea to be bouncing off some of those ideas. And if there are people who are listening, it might, I think, appeal to them as well.
I want to start with your opinion of Agnipath scheme, the pros and cons of it.
So, look, it is my belief from what I have seen and observed and served in the Indian Army. It is my opinion that this is a scheme or is a movement in the right direction. It may be contrary to the opinion that has been expressed by a number of veterans, but I feel very strongly that the policies and the thought processes and the organization that we fought wars with in the past is not something that we can carry forward into the future. This change, once again, in my opinion, is at least a decade delayed. It should have come at least 10 years back.
What is the biggest advantage of the scheme according to you?
Look, there are a couple of things that merit attention. On the one hand, it is nobody's kind of case that we need to have an army that is aging. From the records, and it's all in the public domain, that the average age in the Indian Army today is somewhere in the 32 years time frame, right, or age bracket. And it is very useful, it is very essential to get this age bracket to be reduced. The average age across the fighting arms, especially, and the supporting arms as well, requires to come down, because it's pure logic that younger people are better prepared, both psychologically, physiologically, and physically, to be fighting battles that require that kind of energy, the kind of stamina. So it's very, very logical. And therefore, what are the ways that we can get the average age to be reduced is what we require to be focused on. There are various means that can be employed to be doing this. This is one of them. That is one part of the issue. The second part of the issue is, of course, the ballooning pensions and salaries bill, right? So, and all of this, once again, is in public domain. The defense budget is somewhere in the region of 5.25 lakh crores. And out of that, the OPEX budget, that is to say your salaries and pensions and the OPEX cost or the maintenance budgets together is somewhere in the 3 to 3.2 lakh crores ballpark figure, which is to say that more than 60% of our budget is going towards manpower costs or recurring costs, which leaves very little in the kitty to be doing our modernization, to bring technology in, to bring equipment systems that are capable of fighting future wars. And that's not a sustainable situation. And therefore, when you bring these two factors in together, there is a very compelling case to make sure that you reorganize the systems and structures of the army. When I say army, I mean the armed forces, to ensure we are in a position to fight the wars of the future. If we were continue the systems and structures that were existent for the last millennia, I'm afraid that's not the way forward. I think I forgot one important point, Levina. I'll just take another 5 minutes to explain this, right?
Please do, please.
Every single unit in the Indian Army, without exception, whether it's a fighting arm, whether it's a supporting arm, or it's a services, have got they are bloated. There is an opportunity to make this slim. The structure can be made slim. It might not amount to much, but we can skim off the bottom of the layer, right? We can remove this thing. There are many support systems in each unit that we can do away with. Let me take one example, right? And I'm not talking about the fighting units. I'm talking about the formation headquarters and the peacetime locations. There are so many of them, right? We have so many support systems that are on rolls, right? We are paying pensions for them, and they are doing only support services, right? Mess waiters in peacetime locations, in training establishments, in headquarters, in static formations which do not move out. Even if there's a war, that formation is not going to move out, right? It is permanently based. Why do you require combatant soldiers to be doing waiter duties there for drivers and those kind of support structures? You do not require it. These can straight away be outsourced, and we need to do that to make our army slim and efficient in fighting. We need to cut out the tail. We need to concentrate on the teeth. And when I talk of teeth, I'm not talking only of the manpower. I'm talking of the systems and equipment as well, right? The systems and the equipment has got to be state of the art. The manpower at the fighting end, at the teeth end, has got to be of a younger profile, better proficient, and more capable. I'm sure the government is already doing the necessary the changes to that, accepting inflows and ideas and suggestions from the veterans, from intelligentsia, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure they will tweak it in a certain manner that makes it more compelling. And all these people who come on TV and beat their chest and do their war cries, irrespective of the fact they've served in the armed forces or not, I think that's being silly. And a couple of veterans too, I must say, a couple of veterans too, is quite shameful, the kind of way they behave on screen.
That's a brilliant point that you mentioned. That's something that was not discussed. I have not read it anywhere. I did read about civil defense people. Is that what this category falls into?
No. That's an entirely different category. In fact, it's good that you bring that out, because that's another. The veterans are really miffed because 45% of the defense pensions that we talk about, right? It's 3.2 lakh crores that we spoke about as part of the defense budget that goes towards salaries and pensions, goes to defense civilians. So,
what are defense civilians? Actually,
all right, defense civilians are like, for example, you have these ammunition depots, the DRDO facilities, right? These are all people from CV Street who are not combatants, who are not uniformed people, but part of the defense ministry, but get paid out of the defense budget, right? So they continue to have pensions. They continue to live the government Sarkari Naukri route, whereas the people who are actually fighting the wars you're asking them to forego their pension. So there is a lot of angst on that. And I think that's a very, very justifiable angst, right? And if this were to be implemented, it requires to be implemented across the board for defense, from the defense estimate, right? Who comes out of the defense budget, the DRDO people, the ammunition depots, and all these PSUs. The PSUs, I'm sorry, they are a separate entity. They're not paid out of the defense budget. But these people, so there are a lot of them. Just imagine, 45% of the entire pension bill is paid out of the defense budget for defense civilians. who have got nothing to, who are not actually fighting the war. They're
not the real combatants,
the
humans.
back end. Yeah, they're not the real combatants. And while they do provide necessary support as required in battle or in a preparatory phase, however, it's very unfair to say that only the combatants are going to be kept out of the pension scheme and the other people are not going to be seeing that. That's unfair, and that's where a lot of angst is generated.
So there's this one thing that's doing rounds, and I've heard almost everyone speak about it, that the regimental system will be destroyed. Will it really be destroyed?
Look, it is a fair kind of concern that has been expressed across different groups of veterans, of people who know the way the army works. And to be very honest with you, the first reaction that I had was precisely the same. So let's just step back for a moment and analyze, why is that so? Why do veterans come across very strongly on the subject and feel that the regimental system, which has stood the test of time, is likely to be destroyed? And that's a very genuine concern. But let's just step back and see what's happening. So we all know, and once again, this is all being debated endlessly, but just at the cost of repetition, I think it's important to place it so that people are able to understand the situation in the right context. The fact of the matter is that the regimental system, as we understand it today, based on class, caste, and region demographics, was brought in by the British. And once they brought it in, the kind of cohesion that was generated in the units by getting people of the same caste, the same class, the same region together had fantastic strengths. We cannot take away from the fact. And all the wars that we have fought over the last 150 odd years, to include wars that we fought under the British, has been fought on this basic premise, and the units and formations that took part in these wars have excelled. And therefore, this is a system that clearly has worked. Now, the question that we require to answer is that a system that is required to be carried forward into the future? I think we need to understand that increasingly wars are moving away from the close contact battles. And there are standoff battles that are coming into the spectrum. So the wars of the previous century, and also possibly of the couple of decades of this century, have been fought on man-to-man contact. These are all contact battles. Now, the Ukrainian war is a case in point. It's just one of the very recent examples of how the large-scale contact. Do I therefore mean that there are not going to be any contact battles? Of course not. There are going to be contact battles as well, but these are not going to be the mass contact battles of the past battlefield. These are going to be isolated, pocketed battles that are going to be fought. So therefore, the man is still very much in the picture. I'm just saying the terms of reference have changed, and therefore we need to re-examine our structural systems from that point of view. Now, let me give you two examples. My own unit, 21 Para, I was originally from the Marathas. I was in 21 Maratha Light Infantry. This was a unit in 1985 after the Blue Star operation, that the government had decided that they required to move away from the fixed class compositions to make it a more all India caste-based composition. After that experience, the government realized that having fixed class compositions has got its own pitfalls, and therefore they did experimentation with a couple of units. 21 Maratha Light Infantry, I was the part of that unit, was one of those units where they moved away from purely Marathas. They got 4 companies, each company a different caste or a different grouping, right? So we had the Jats, we had the Dogras, we had the Mysoreans, and we had the Marathas. And similarly, there were, if my recollection is correct, there were about 10 to 12 infantry units that they tried out in this model, all of those infantry units have succeeded. That is an experiment that has succeeded. So even in the context of close battles and intense CI operations that we've been going through, these units have performed very well. There was, of course, a period of time immediately on raising that the teething trouble that comes with raising of new units. All of these units went through that. My own unit went through that. But thereafter, the curve just went up. So to say that the regimental system is going to be broken down and therefore the combat effectiveness of these units are going to be coming into question, I do not agree with it, because we have precedents. These are systems or structural changes that have been tested, and the tests have been successful. Any idea is as good. The strategy could be brilliant, but the execution, if it is flawed, the results are going to suffer. But if the people who are going to be executing this, and I have great belief in the senior leadership of the Indian Army. I think they have been through the rings of fire, and they are quite capable of executing this flawlessly. There has been application of thought, in my opinion, within the higher rungs of the armed forces, and this is something that they have been debating internally. Having said that, there are things I think the current scheme can be tweaked to make it even better.
Right. You mentioned Russia-Ukraine war, and you also mentioned that the average age of our Indian soldier is 32. So I read this somewhere that Russian soldiers' average age is 23, 22. So that kind of proves your point. And that also reminds me that there is this age issue that everyone is mentioning. One, that they'll be spending the best part of their early 20s in the army, yet they'll not be able to reap the benefit of it, is something that is a complaint that is coming from the defense enthusiasts. And also they're saying 4 years are just too less. Is it true?
I think it's a very compelling concern. It's a very compelling concern, and to that extent, I agree with it. Let's actually break down these figures. Right, 4 years is 48 months. Out of these 48 months, 6 months the guy is going to be on training. He's of no use to a fighting formation, and thereafter he is going to be on leave for 2 months in a year. So 4 years, 2 months. Let's make it 8 months. So we have about 12 to 14 months out of these 48 months that he's going to be not available, right? And don't forget, these are young, new recruits. They take their time to find their feet, to mesh and integrate with the unit. So you take away another 6-9 months at the bare minimum. So net, effectively in the unit to carry out the task that he's been recruited for, he's going to be getting somewhere in the region of about 16 to 18 months. And I think that's inadequate, right? So why are you recruiting the people in the first place? You're recruiting the people to be able to deliver for a certain mission. You're training them and you're bringing them on board. And if you do not get at least 4 years where they are able to deliver, it becomes a pointless exercise. Or, well, let me choose my words very carefully. I'm not saying a pointless exercise, but this can be done much better. Once again, let's step back for a moment and see what are the aims that are being put out there. Right, the aim number one is to bring down the age profile of the army. When I say the army, I mean the armed forces. And number two, that there is this ballooning pension bill which has got to be brought under control. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to equip our forces to be able to deliver the kind of results that we want them to deliver, right? So these are the prime objectives. Everything else is secondary. These are the prime objectives from an armed forces standpoint, right? And the country's standpoint, when you look at that. Now, to achieve these twin objectives, is 4 years the optimal time frame? I think we can do better than that.
Since we are talking about the quantity, there's also this discussion that, so we are trying to push for better quality, So there are too many changes. We did not have such. I mean, it's not that we did not have issues with China, but it's just that it's at its belligerent best right now. So people are like, this is not the best time to introduce it. What's your opinion?
No, I do not agree with that. I do not agree with that. Uh, there is a saying in the Navy SEALs, the US Navy SEALs, which says, the easy day was yesterday. So if you keep waiting for the best time for something to be rolled out, that best time is never going to come. You can't wait forever. Like I said, this is a scheme that should have been rightfully introduced 10 years back. I think we are already 10 years behind the curve. When are we going to be introducing it? Are we going to be introducing it when we have gone past the war and when our results are not going to be meeting our expectations? Is that when we're going to be rolling it out? I think there is a case for us to be moving forward on this. Let's be sure-footed and move forward on this. There are more than adequate reasons why we need to be making this change. How this change is going to be executed, what are the tweaks that can be given, that's a different story. We'll come to that.
I've read many tweets. Some of the tweets were literally like, we are training these men and, when they go out, they might create a lot of chaos. And these are well-trained men, infantrymen, and they would know how to use the weapons better. So will we end up losing them to ISI? ISI might try to recruit them. I mean, these trained men can be used against the country too.
Let's not give too much of credit to the ISI. They will keep doing what they want to be doing. I mean, that's their roji roti, right? If you take that away from them, what are they there for? So they will continue to do it, irrespective of whether X number of people are being released from the army or not. They will continue to try whatever they are trying, and good luck to them. Before we get to that, once again, let's step back and first discuss the issue about how this scheme can be made better before we discuss onto what happens to the people once they exit after the 4-year period or whatever is the period, right? Let's first discuss the mechanics or the time frame or how this scheme can be tweaked to make it a better proposition. Before I say that, so we've spoken about two contingents or two stakeholders in this entire game. That is the armed forces and the country as such, right? The third stakeholder, when I say the country, I mean the government. I'm sorry, let me just correct myself. I'm not talking about the country, but the government, which includes the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance, and so on and so forth. And the third important stakeholder are the young kids who are potential recruits, who they are looking forward to. Now let's take a moment to understand where they are in this entire equation, right? Now, this entire thing about a sarkari naukri is, in my opinion, overstated. And let us understand this. Why are people looking for a sarkari naukri? At the base of this, of course, there are many other things like the society mein izzat zyada ho jata hai, pension milta hai, vagara vagara vagara. All of that. Job security. Now, what is job security? Job security essentially means that irrespective of how I perform, whether I am outstanding, I am good, I am mediocre, I am below average. Once I get in, once I clear the hurdle, once I pass through the filter and get into a sarkari naukri, then I retire whenever I retire, as per the government rules. And in between, unless I do something of such severe nature, I cannot be thrown out. That is the concept of job security, right? The job security construct does not take into account what are my skill sets at the point of entry and how am I going to continue to enhance my skill sets that I am capable of being employed even further down the line, right? Whether it is in the army or the other services in the government structure, wherever they are, right? That is a construct that requires to change. Let's think about it for a moment. You take in about 46,000 people on the Agnipath scheme, and you say that you were going to be keeping them for 4 years and then releasing them. We already spoke about the fact that, therefore that means that effectively this guy is going to contribute only 50% of the time, probably about 24 months or so. The rest of the time is not useful, right? And that's not good enough. So I propose that if we say that instead of 4 years, you're going to be taking out 75% of them and only 25% go into the regular cadre, we flip it around and we say that at the end of 4 years, the bottom 25% on a skill-based assessment that you do, you take out the bottom 25% and ease them into the CV street. And the balance 75% of them, you get them to continue for 4 more years. That is to say, if you take in about 46,000 people, I'm guessing about, somewhere in the region of about 30,000 people, you continue for 4 more years. That is 8 years, 4 years plus 4 years. You're still not giving them a pension. At the end of 8 years, you retain only 25% and then you slip these people back, allow them to move out into CV street. That way, 37.5% of the total number of people that you've taken in get to serve for 8 years instead of 4 years, right? So it becomes a win-win. People want to serve for a greater amount of time. The army wants people to serve for a greater amount of time, but you're still not giving them a pension, right? So I think this is a midway scheme that could possibly work from both sides. Now, what are the advantages here? At 4 years, the government rules stipulate that anyone who serves in an organization for 5 years requires to be given a gratuity. When you get them to serve only for 4 years, you're not giving them a gratuity. Now, a gratuity is a one-time payment. At the time of the release, he gets a gratuity. So don't grudge him that. Give him the gratuity. Let him serve for, instead of 4, for 5 years, and you allow him to leave with a gratuity. So this balance of 1 year, you understand what I'm saying? 4 years plus 1 year, 5 years. The 5th year, you utilize to skill him up. So that he's able to contribute to the private sector. Now, how do you skill him up? A lot of corporate bodies have stepped forward and said that we are willing to take these people on. Now, obviously, people just with a certificate, a person going out with just a certificate that he's an Agniveer and he has served for 4 years, is not going to be useful for the corporate world. However, if the corporate step forward and help along with the government in a public-private partnership, they set up skilling centers and skill them according to their needs, then these people become useful. So what has happened is he spent 4 years in the army. About 35-40% of the time he was under training, and thereafter he's done some hard field work in the armed forces, and thereafter he's done 1 year of skilling himself up to transition him back into the civil street. So industry relevant skill sets have been picked up, and he is now able to be absorbed into civil street, right? Whereas about the balance 75% of them have moved forward for another 4 years. At the end of 8 years, similarly, we do the same thing. 1 year, you skill the people up, make it industry relevant skilling in a public-private partnership with the corporate bodies, so that he gets relevant skilling before he steps out into the corporate world. Now, this is something, there would be additional expenditure involved, of course, but I think this is something that people would be able to understand, and this is something that can be rationalized, and people will be much more ready to embrace.
Though the scheme has major advantages, it has its cons. So do you think we should have started with a pilot scheme? We should have tested it on small bunch of people and then went ahead with it.
It could have been, yes. In a perfect world, that's the best ways to do it, right? You start a small pilot scheme and see how it works. And unfortunately, the political discourse in our country and the way things shape up is that there does not seem to be anything that goes beyond a certain level. There are enough and more people who are out to chop the legs off any scheme that you announce. And therefore, there's got its pitfalls. Having said that, in a democratic system, it's best to get a larger audience to debate and speak about it and discuss things on an open platform, and then possibly to implement or execute it. The only pitfall that like I said earlier, is that not many of these schemes ever see the light of the day, because there is someone or the other who's always got a problem with something or the other, and therefore it never sees the light of day.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to, or any message to the government, or to the people who are so confused regarding this?
No message to the government. I think there are smart people there who see and understand and know what they're doing.
Most of this which is being written about and spoken about is speculative. There's still a little ambiguity, right? From the army side, they've not given out the exact way they'll be recruiting, or we can only speculate regarding how the training and the quality of training will be, because there were few people who insisted that this will be more about infantry training. The soldiers will be trained like infantrymen. So what happens to the mechanized infantry and other services? Yeah, this is something that I would.
That's a good point that you raise, and that's once again a good concern that's been highlighted. Because let's understand this: when a recruit comes in, I'm talking of the current scheme of things. How does a recruit come in? He goes to the recruit regimental center, and he does basic recruit training. Now, irrespective of the fact whether he's going to the infantry, to the artillery, to the armored, to the corps of signals, the medical corps, or wherever else, the basic recruit training remains the same. It's just picking a guy off CV Street and getting some regimentation into him, and kind of boot camp. It basically is boot camp, right? You're just conditioning him to a military way of life. So the 6 months of training is got nothing to do with mechanized infantry or armored or artillery, or the guns and the tanks and the whatever else. He's doing none of those. It's just essentially simple, basic military training, recruit training, right? So that's what he's doing, and therefore, when he is getting into the areas of specialization, obviously he's got to do advanced training, and that cannot be done in this 4 years. So what essentially it means is that the recruits that they're going to be picking up is going to be doing approximately 2.5 years of basic soldiering in units, irrespective of whether he's going into an armored regiment or an artillery regiment or an infantry regiment or signals or whatever else. He's going to be just doing the basic. This is just basic stuff. So it's only the 25% that they are going to be transitioning into the regular cadre who are going to be going for these advanced courses, right? So that's a mix. That's a mix. And you're right. I think the communication has been a bit of a problem. The nuts and bolts of the scheme, it's all generics that have just been still spelled out, and it possibly could have been a graded process that you give the basics, and then you get into a little bit more of nitty-gritties, and then further the fine print, right? But I think there was no avenue for any of those, because the moment it was announced, the thing just went into chaos, and everybody had an opinion, and everybody jumped in, and shouting and mudslinging and whatever else that was happening. So I think the level 2 and level 3 of the disclaimers and the disclosures and the fine print never got to be discussed. That's my understanding.
And the government seems to be very ready to, flexible to introduce changes, because within the first 24 hours, that age limit was increased to 2 years. From 21, it was increased to 23. So I do believe if we are making any suggestions, they will incorporate it.
Yeah, but Lavina, that's one of the things that surprised me. They were caught blindsided by this, right? It was, everybody knew that for the last 2 years there's been no recruitment, and therefore people who had trained and prepared themselves to pass through that first filter, to pass through those examinations, they were left stranded. And what happens to these people who have put in time and effort, and they were disappointed? All right, COVID was a thing, so therefore there was no recruitment that took place. But how do you cater for them? This is one group of people that clearly would feel disappointed, tremendously disappointed. Anybody would feel disappointed if you really prepared for an exam and you've not been able to give the exam because it's been scrapped for 2 years. It's been kind of held back. Anybody would feel disappointed, and therefore, they should have thought about this and done it not as an afterthought, but this should have been put into the mix right at the beginning, so that these kind of issues which are very fixable and it's common sense, that needn't have been brought to this kind of level and add to the ruckus that's already been created. So that surprised me.
So what will be your final message to the people who are preparing for this?
The final message is that, look, I think it's a good scheme. The scheme requires to be tweaked. It is a movement in the right direction.
You touched upon every part of this, all those controversies that's being discussed, and you've also given us solutions. I'm so glad you're here and discussing this topic. Thank you so much, Col Subin.
Great. You too. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Thanks, Lavina. Good night.